Welcome, friends. Good to have you here today. I want to share a PowerPoint with you about engineering errors or errors in engineering writing. These are some mistakes that we have seen here at our company when we are revising research papers written by Taiwanese authors in the engineering domain. And I want to go through them because these type of errors make editors and reviewers recommend major revision or in some cases rejection of our research papers. And today I've organized my talk into 9 different errors. First, I'm going to discuss articles. That's a, an, and the. Then I'm going to talk briefly about punctuation. I'm going to talk about subject-verb agreement, tense-verb agreement, clear antecedents, verb usage, redundancy, prepositions, and then finally some typographical errors. Again, all of these sentences are taken from engineering papers that we have been working on here in our editing company. The first thing I want to discuss is articles. Authors tend to overuse them. Sometimes they omit very necessary articles in research papers. Now, articles are required to distinguish between the type of reference being made, either generic or general or specific, very precise. Now, the first one is a, and. That is what we call the indefinite article, and we use it with countable nouns and when it's introduced in the text. And then subsequent instances of the same term will use the. Here's an example. Desalination is process that involves pretreatment of seawater. Now, because process is a countable noun, and because desalination is introduced here, the article to be used is a. Hence, the sentence should be, desalination is a process that involves pretreatment of seawater. Now, let's talk about the for a minute. When a term or a concept is known, the precedes the noun. An example, process requires a continuation power supply. Since the process is known, the article to be used here is the. So the sentence should be, the process requires a continuous power supply. Now, sometimes we use no articles. Articles should not be used when the reference being made is generic or general, not specific, not a specific process like we saw in our last slide. In addition, articles should not be used with proper nouns, plural count nouns, and non-count nouns. An example, the duration of the process depends on the seawater quality. The second article is not required, as the word quality is a non-count noun. And there's a good guide here in this link if you want a larger discussion or a longer discussion on when to use articles. Let me talk about punctuation for a few minutes. Incorrect punctuation can change the meaning of a sentence. So errors such as comma splices, incorrect usage of commas and semicolons, and incorrect punctuation must be avoided. An example, an earlier study contradicts this result. It demonstrated that displacement leads to a motion. And here a semicolon should be used instead of a second comma. Hence, the sentence should read, an earlier study contradicts this result, semicolon. It demonstrated that displacement leads to a motion. Subject-verb agreement. A singular subject will always take a singular verb, whereas a plural subject will take a plural verb. Example, the mixer and filter is required for filtration. Here, although a mixer and filter are singular, they are used together, making it a plural subject. Therefore, the verb should be used, plural should be used, are. Verb and verb tense. Authors generally tend to use a mix of tenses, using the present tense when discussing the results or the past tense when referring to the paper are some instances of incorrect usage of tense. Here's an example. The paper discussed. One thing to remember, all references in the current paper or in your article should always be in the present tense. For example, this example should therefore read, this paper discusses. This article states. This study investigates. Here, the study has already been conducted and thus should read, this study investigated. So remember that the paper or the article, the document, is in the present tense. But the study, the investigation, the research has been completed and therefore in the past tense. So this study investigated, but the paper investigates. Just a little academic convention to keep in mind. Clear antecedents. Another common problem is not explicitly mentioning nouns or pronouns like ideas or methods and so on. An unclear antecedent disrupts the flow and confuses the reader. For example, these chemicals are required for this process. It needs to be available in sufficient quantities. The problem is, I don't know which chemical you are referring to or which element you're referring to. Or maybe they're both needed in sufficient quantities. Therefore, it's better to very specifically say it's iron or it's calcium that is required in specific quantities. Verb usage. An accurate verb enhances the quality of a sentence and improves clarity. Hence, it is important to use the appropriate verbs. For example, the efficiency is evaluated by calculating. Here, determined is the appropriate verb instead of evaluated. Another example. Alcohol was then flowed into the pipe. Now, flowing is a process that occurs on its own. However, in this example, alcohol did not flow on its own. Rather, it was introduced into the pipe. Therefore, a better verb would be poured. Redundancy. Now, redundancy is basically repeating information, and it causes what we call excessive wordiness. Redundancy should be avoided for a more crisp and clear text. Here's an example. In this current study, a novel method for constructing systems was developed. Here, the terms this and current both refer to the same thing. That is the present study. Hence, only one of these words should be retained. However, if current is retained, it will need an article the. Hence, this is a better option here for conciseness. Preposition. In addition to an appropriate verb, an appropriate preposition enhances the quality of a sentence. For example, the different states in a system are as follows. A system does not contain states. Thus, a better preposition here will be of. Thus, the sentence should read, the different states of a system are as follows. Typographical errors are the last thing I want to talk about today. Sometimes American and British English conventions can be confusing, and sometimes they use words in different ways. In addition, form is used instead of from and vice versa. These are examples of typographical errors. Errors such as using criterions instead of criteria, and incorrect spellings can be easily fixed by running a spell check on a Word document. Well, that's all that I have for you today. Thank you for joining. Goodbye.